The listing agent showed up and asked what the hell they were doing. They got kicked out, and the next weekday he lost his license. Ryan, who is behind the camera, found some wild Reddit scenarios related to real estate. I'm going to read them and react to them and hopefully be able to give you some context on what the laws are and what's legal and what's not. We're going to start with one titled Seller Won't Leave the House. And the scenario here is that the buyer bought a property 30 days ago. The seller was supposed to move out the day after closing. It's 30 days later, still hasn't moved out, calls the police on the buyers every time they try to get in there. The seller's like, I've been here for 3 decades. I don't have anywhere to go. The police are saying it's a civil matter. The buyers do not know what to do. They're in Illinois. I can't speak to Illinois, but in North Carolina, this could become a scenario where the buyers have to file for summary ejectment, even though the sellers are not renters. The sellers are effectively becoming squatters on the property. So they're going to have to take some civil action, and it could take months to actually get the sellers out. In North Carolina, typically, like, a buyer won't get possession early or a seller won't stay after closing without certain contracts in place to govern how this is all going to work. But typically the possession has to be delivered at closing, at the time of closing. So once that deed is on record, the buyer has to have possession to the property in North Carolina. Unfortunately, it's a civil matter. They're going to have to go to court. And in North Carolina, there's no self-help. You can't go, padlock the doors and all of that yourself. You got to go get the help of the courts. Okay, this next one is titled Under Contract and Honestly Not Too Happy. It's a first-time home buyer, just went under contract for a house. It was, after work, toured 8 houses after work. They were all in pretty bad shape. Didn't really like any of them, but picked the best one out of the 8. Now that it's, a day or two after, this person is like, I am not sure. So I'm only 26. Should I really care if this isn't in my dream home? Am I overreacting? I'm going through inspections now. Should I keep looking and bidding on more homes for a better outcome? My perspective is you don't buy a house just to buy a house. This is not a casual decision. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of effort. If you aren't sure about it or you don't have some compelling reason, you've done a financial analysis of, even if this isn't really the house I want, I'm going to make XYZ improvements and then I'm going to move out within 2 years and rent it. Or, if it's not part of a larger plan and this is just you're picking the best of 8 that you saw in one evening, maybe a little bit of a rush decision and take some time and look elsewhere. If this was a buyer in North Carolina, they could back out. They might lose their due diligence fee depending on the time period. They might lose their due diligence fee and their earnest money deposit if they back out after the due diligence period expires. Depending on that, it might be better than buying a house that you're going to have to sink a lot of money into and you don't really like anyway. The next one is a comment from a Redditor who said that they didn't look up the sex offender registry before they moved in. They met a neighbor and were getting kind of some off vibes and then checked the registry a couple days later. And in fact, that neighbor was on there. They're not asking to rescind the contract, but unfortunately, this is not a reason to rescind a contract. And in our state, North Carolina, is part of your due diligence period. So you're welcome to look at that registry ahead of time and make your decisions accordingly. You can't undo the contract because of something like this. And not just this, there's a lot of things that you should look up before you even go under contract. Like, do you have restrictions on the property? Are there any weird easements that would be a big problem for you that you don't want to have? So that's what the due diligence period is for, but also there are things you can find out before you even sign the contract, and this would be one that would probably be on my list. Another commenter was a seller. The seller's buyer wanted to move in before closing so that he and his family could have Christmas together. And then after the buyers moved in, hang up with the financing. Couldn't get financing. It turns out that this buyer had a history of doing this, going under contract on properties that they're not getting financing for, but asking to move in early. Once they're in, just like the seller that wouldn't move out. A buyer that gets early possession, doesn't close, and never moves out, gonna have to go to the courts and get some help to get them out. This goes back to that comment I made earlier about possession being delivered at closing. Notice that is at closing, and in North Carolina, closing being defined as when the deed is recorded. When the deed is recorded is when possession transfers, not before. So buyers will want the keys at the closing table and be upset if they're not given access to the property the second they walk away from the attorney's office. But in North Carolina, the seller does not have to provide access until the deed is on record and the property ownership has actually changed hands. This next comment is about a seller who, had a person buying their first home, really excited. They were cleared to close, and then they get right up to the closing date, and boom, new debt notification. The buyer went out and bought an expensive truck, and now they couldn't qualify for the loan. So, buyers, please don't finance anything while you're under contract to buy a house. Don't change jobs while you're under contract to buy a house, because this can make you lose your qualification for the loan. This one had a happy ending to the story because the buyer's dad helped refinance the truck into the dad's name so that it could get off of the buyer's debt to income ratio and he could be reapproved for the loan. But that could have gone very poorly and that contract could have fallen apart. I've seen it happen in our firm many times. In fact, I've had a client be late to his refinance because he bought not just one, but two brand new trucks in his name. He got hung up at the dealership, got to his refinance quite a bit late, and his lender is there and is like, yeah, we can't close. You don't qualify anymore. So he did not close his refinance that day. We were able to get that done about a year later. Okay, this one I'm going to read verbatim because this is wild. My uncle-in-law got a real estate license. A few months later, on the 4th of July, he invited the whole family to watch fireworks at a house being listed that had a nice view. He never asked permission. As soon as they showed up and used the lockbox, the listing agent showed up and asked what the hell they were doing. They got kicked out, and the next weekday, he lost his license. Yep, that tracks. Yeah, you can't do that. When you get that lockbox key to be able to get into the houses that you're showing, you don't get to just go in there whenever you feel like it for any reason. Certainly not to host your family and friends for a party. There's not even really anything to talk about legally here because I feel like that should have been common sense. It's certainly taught when you're getting your license, your real estate license, at least in North Carolina it is. I took the 75-hour course. I'm not going to get my license, but I just wanted to know what they're taught. They're taught this. So in North Carolina, it shouldn't have been a surprise. I don't know about in other states, but I imagine they teach about the same thing. All right, that's quite a few wild real estate Reddit scenarios. Some of those kind of took me by surprise. If you have any wild scenarios, whether on Reddit or otherwise, just pop them in the comments. I would love to react to them in the next video.